Trend. I'm the National Director for the League for Human Rights of B'nai Brith, Canada. And I welcome everyone to our call in Newfoundland and Labrador. The goals of this call are to tell you all a little bit about B'nai Brith, and particularly about our 2022 audit of anti-Semitic incidents, focusing on Newfoundland and Labrador. We're also going to look at Newfoundland's recent adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and what the province is doing to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. During the evening, I'll present a PowerPoint that will address most of these subjects, but we're also going to hear from some very, very talented speakers. For this call this evening, elected officials were invited from across Newfoundland, members of the House of Assembly, law enforcement, from the Jewish community, other community leaders, stakeholders from civil service and community organizations. In fact, we have a couple leaders of national organizations with us this evening who work right across Canada and want to be more active in Newfoundland, heighten their profile, and are taking advantage of this call. Our speakers this evening will include Jerry Burns. Jerry is the MHA for Corner Brook. He's the Minister of Immigration, Skills and Labor in the government of Newfoundland. He's a guiding force in the province for the adoption of the IHRA definition, which happened on May 9th by the issuance of a proclamation. But for those who don't know, he was also a federal MP between 1996 and 2015, and I believe he was the federal minister for the Atlantic Opportunities Agency. I think he interfaced with Erwin Kotler, who is going to be one of our speakers this evening and knows him through Parliament. We're very eager to hear what Jerry has to tell us because he's made combating anti-Semitism and ensuring strong institutions in Newfoundland to fight hate a priority for his ministry. Erwin Kotler will address us as well. Erwin is currently the Special Envoy for Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. He's known as a former federal minister. He was our Minister of Justice. In fact, he was the minister for the riding that covered about 95% of the electoral district that I represented for many, many years. And I've worked very closely with Erwin while I was elected, and I've continued to work closely with him. Erwin has been the moving force recently for Parliament adopting honorary citizenship for political prisoner Vladimir Kara-Murza. Erwin has also been a nominee for the Nobel Prize and one of the moving forces in this country for ensuring that Canada is a strong voice for the protection of civil rights and human rights right across the world. Erwin's time block this evening will be divided between himself and Noah Liu, his special assistant with the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Noah will take about 5 minutes of Erwin's 10-minute block. We'll also hear from Michael Mostyn, the CEO of B'nai Brith. Michael has grown B'nai Brith over the last, I believe, 9 years that he's been the CEO. He's located in Toronto, and he's ensured that B'nai Brith has grown from providing services to being among Canada's prime advocacy organizations. We'll also hear from Rabbi Chernitsky. He's the CEO and director of Chabad in St. John's, Newfoundland. Rabbi Chernitsky was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He studied in Montreal, Quebec, and he's active in St. John's, Newfoundland. Before I go further, I'd like to mention some people who are already on the call or are going to join us shortly. John Abbott, the Minister of Transport and Infrastructure of Newfoundland. Welcome, John. You've been on a number of our calls. We appreciate the support you give to B'nai Brith. We're going to have Lucy Stoyle, the MHA from Mount Pearl North, will be with us in a few moments. She's finishing another call. Ophelia Ravenscroft, City Councillor for the City of St. John's. Maggie Payton, the Director of Immigration Policy and Settlement in the Office of Immigration and Multiculturalism of the Government of Newfoundland. Kerry Chater, the Executive Assistant to Minister Byrne. Emmanuel Haven, professor from Memorial University, the very Reverend Roger Whalen, the rector of the Anglican Church of St. John the Baptist. By the way, Reverend Whalen, I've been to the church. It's absolutely beautiful. John Tompkins, the director of communications for Minister Byrne, Reverend Jason Hagerstrom from the Eastern Diocese of the Catholic Church of Newfoundland, Miriam Pearl, the Director of Community Affairs for the Consulate of Israel in Toronto, will be joining us during the call. I believe we'll have Mati Seligson from Media Relations Chabad Lubavitch in New York joining us in the call to support Rabbi Chernitsky. We're expecting Inspector Danny Doiron to represent Chief Patrick Roche of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. We have Norman Simon, who is the National Chair of Canadians for Coexistence, an organization that promotes harmonious relations between racial and religious minorities and groups with the general public right across Canada. So this evening, we hope to look at the major themes of the evening, get elected officials and others right across Newfoundland more familiar with B'nai Brith and what we do and what the province has done. This broadcast is on Zoom, but I'd like to alert all the speakers, it will be rebroadcast on YouTube, and we will usually get a far larger audience on YouTube, either during the call or viewed afterwards. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Michael Mostyn, the CEO of B'nai Brith, to provide some greetings. Michael?
Thank you very much, Marvin. First of all, once again, thank you, Minister Byrne, Erwin Kotler, our special envoy, Rabbi Chernitsky, and Marvin for hosting. This is really an incredible event focusing on Newfoundland and Labrador. I just got back to Toronto. I am based in Toronto out of the Toronto office, but I have to say over the last 3 days, I've been in 3 provinces. Unfortunately, Newfoundland wasn't one of them, but I was in Quebec just this morning. We had a very successful golf tournament yesterday, and I had the pleasure of being in Manitoba over the weekend. But certainly I'm going to have to get over to Newfoundland sometime soon. Since 1875, B'nai Brith has been representing the grassroots Jewish community in Canada. And as Marvin mentioned, we're well known for our social services that we provide to those who really are desperate, especially in times like these. But we've also had to step up to the plate, and we have, in the fight against hate, and in particular in the fight against anti-Semitism. And that's really what we're talking about this evening, of course, with a Newfoundland focus. And we really admire Newfoundland for stepping up to the plate and showing leadership in this fight. Jews, once again last year, unfortunately, were the #1 most targeted group in the country when it comes to religious-based discrimination. And that's unacceptable. The trend lines have been growing over the years, and it's really proven itself not just to be a global phenomenon, but also something that we have to be concerned of here in Canada, and we need to take action to ensure that everyone is educated to combat hate and to believe that there is an inherent human dignity in all of us. We must respect each other. That's really our mission and our values here at B'nai Brith. And thank you to all of the speakers. And I know that you're going to give some thoughtful approaches and on the topic of anti-Semitism in Newfoundland. And we all really look forward to hearing from all of you. So thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Michael, for being with us this evening. And it was, by the way, a pleasure to see you in Montreal yesterday for our golf tournament. I think people were really impressed by what a wonderful tournament that turned out to be. So before we go to Minister Byrne, I think, and perhaps Charlene Taylor can help me, that Charlene is a member of the House of Assembly, and I believe Paul Dinn, who's on the call, may be as well. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with all the members of the House Assembly in Newfoundland as provinces I've worked in more, but I'd like to welcome both of you to the call. It's appreciated. And we will ensure that every member of the House has the information that comes out of this call, and that is they can share it with their constituents and their stakeholders as well. As Michael said, Jews tend to be In fact, they don't tend to be. They are the most targeted minority in Canada among religious minorities. Statistics Canada just issued its 2022 report. 67, actually, to be precise, 66.9% of all the police reported hate crimes in Canada were aimed at Jews. That's a shocking figure. Jews comprise 1.25% at most of the Canadian population. So clearly, we need leadership to confront it, to call it out, and to alert the public to it. And Newfoundland is doing that. There was a whole debate that led ultimately to a press conference and the issuing of a proclamation on May 9th. Minister Byrne, I was honored to have been invited to say a few words at that press conference. Perhaps you can enlighten our audience as to the process by which IHRA was adopted in Newfoundland and what else you're doing in your ministry, not only to combat anti-Semitism, but to put in strong institutions to ensure hate has no place in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Minister Byrne. Jerry, you're on mute.
There, I think our administrator may have muted me for a minute, which is probably a good administrative process. So I thank you, Mervyn, for the introduction, but also for assembling this august group to talk about something which is absolutely essential that needs to be spoken of. Thank you for B'nai Brith's recognition of some of the work that Newfoundland and Labrador has been engaged in. We have more work to do, so we're not prepared to say thank you for laurels given and leave it at that. There is a significant body of energy and motion that is still required of us. Allow me, in the moments that I do have, to say a very special hello to someone who I refer to and deem a special friend, and that is Irwin Cotler. Irwin and I sat in large caucuses and smaller caucuses over the years as members of government and opposition. But one thing is absolutely abundantly clear: Irwin, no matter where he sits, he stands tall in the task that is before him. I want to say a special thank you to Irwin for your mentorship to me personally. As a member of Canada's Parliament, I sat in the august chambers of Parliament and listened to Irwin speak to a pin drop of human rights, of anti-hate and anti-Semitism. I have witnessed his efforts to represent those who are political captives to political duress in places from Iran to Russia. And so I am well aware of the power that one person can make when working in community with others. And so thank you. And Irwin, congratulations on your recent award, your exceptionally prestigious award, which will be, I understand, will be conveyed to you in October. So very much deserving and well done. So with that said, great to be here with you, Michael, with Mervyn, with my good friend Rabbi Chernitsky, with Emmanuel Haven, and I hope Michael Paul might be on the call as well today. I've made great friends, great relationships with the Jewish community here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I feel as though we've made great strides together, because that is the way this is done. Now, allow me to say, just from the get-go, it may be said incorrectly that Newfoundland and Labrador is not a hotspot of anti-Semitism. That would be incorrect. Anywhere anti-Semitism exists, it is a hotspot. We live by the motto, we live by the call, never again. And what we do know is that things, when allowed to precipitate, allowed to be left unchallenged, have a tendency to grow. And that is also why I'm really delighted to be joined by my colleagues from the House of Assembly, both from the Progressive Conservative Caucus and from my own, from within the Government Caucus, This is how we get things done in Newfoundland and Labrador, and we have enjoyed tremendous all-party support for initiatives which tackle hate. We find, and we do believe, and I think it's a fair statement to make, that if there's one thing that unites Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, it is to tackle those who would take on the underdog, those who would take on those who are most vulnerable. And we take that on with a vengeance. And that's why I think we're all joined here on this particular call tonight, because we see a necessity to this. For my own experience, for my own journey, I have to say that anti-Semitism was not necessarily front and center in my conscientiousness in my earlier life. It was not necessarily seen by me or experienced by me, but it's something that I have come to learn reluctantly is very much present in our community, and it must be stamped out root and stem. My early days as a parliamentarian in Ottawa in the nation's parliament, I had an opportunity to visit Yad Vashem in Israel. And I can tell you that that experience of visiting the Holocaust Memorial left me both physically sick and emotionally changed. And it was from that experience that I realized more deeply than I had ever before the necessity of recognizing the systemic, intergenerational bias, prejudice, and hatred that has persisted against Jews since potentially time immemorial, since the beginning of Jewish culture. And that is the Jewish presence. And so that is one of the reasons why I think today we cannot take a passive view. When you look at the history of Jewish persecution as a faith-based group, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to take this on. One of the reasons why I have become a center point or a minister with key responsibilities in anti-racism and against anti-Semitism in particular is because Newfoundland and Labrador is a province which is increasingly conscientiously welcoming the world. We recognize that in order to be a full and prosperous province, we have to be not only welcoming, but we also have to nurture. When people arrive in our province to our behest, that it is essential for us to make sure that their settlement, their resettlement, their move to our province, their taking on Newfoundland and Labrador as their home must be affirmed and supported. And so that is why we take very seriously our anti-racism, anti-hatred initiatives. I am the co-chair of the Anti-Racism Committee of Cabinet in Newfoundland and Labrador. I've assumed that role since it was created by our Premier Dr. Andrew Furey. And we have met with groups, but more in particular, we have identified and tackled hatred as it is presented. The objective of our Ministerial Anti-Racism Committee was not to collect data, to wait for a report to be one day produced and then subsequently shelved. Its intent was to become an organic, living, action-orientated, senior-level cabinet committee to deal with issues as reported and as they arise. And one of the events that we already had to deal with, one of the things that consumed my attentions very early on, which I called on B'nai Brith to support me in combating, was a particular advertising campaign directed at the city of St. John's Metrobus, calling the state of Israel apartheid, and causing, in consequence, significant hatred and identified hatred at an increasing velocity to the Jewish community of our province. And in so doing, we met with resistance. We met with significant resistance by those who were promoting the campaign, saying this was not about hatred, this was not about anti-Semitism. It was about identifying and promoting that Israel, the state of Israel, was an apartheid state. That is in itself wrong and therefore contributes to hatred. When Israel is not, by view of the government of Canada, by the experts that review, that analyze this, I took my advice not only from community at large, but from our own national government, promoting this as a fact when it was not. The consequence being the Jewish community of our province not only felt separate and apart, but increasingly experienced with an increasing velocity acts of hatred. That was unacceptable. And so talking the talk must also lead to walking the walk. So we met with the city of St. John's to advise them that this was the view of the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, that their transit system was promoting a hate-based message, and that there were alternatives to this for its resolution. At the end of the day, that independent government, that municipal government, had opportunities to rectify it, but it did somewhat rectify itself. But it was at that point in time, and I'll say this as an introduction to where we're going next, it was then and there that I really realized, and it was affirmed to me, that the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism was the next necessary element to saying out loud hatred against Jews, acts of diminishing Jews will not be tolerated by our government and will not be tolerated by Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who our government represents. And so it was from that point forward that I began to investigate, calling on B'nai Brith to educate me more in its formation, in its origins, and in its substance. And for this reason, I was very, very proud to have taken the decision myself, with the support of our Premier and with the support of our Cabinet, to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in Newfoundland and Labrador. And now I'll go where I need to go next. It was from the adoption, the public adoption of the IHRA definition, that it fomented a further wave of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism actions in our province. I, for the very first time, received numerous telephone calls and email messages condemning me personally for adopting this definition, that it was ill-suited, that it was biased and inappropriate. And it was at that point in time that I knew that I would need to stand my ground even farther and stronger than ever before. We stand by the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We stand by its spirit and its intent. And to make sure that those who would foster, who take exception to those that would fight who would fight hate, by suggesting that they are the only conduit for fighting hate, that their views are the only views that really matter. I'm very, very pleased today to announce that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador will be commencing, in harmony and consultation with the Jewish community of both Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada through B'nai Brith, we will be engaging in a $250,000 multi-year anti-Semitism campaign to better educate Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and to become an even stronger beacon on the national stage and hopefully on the international stage, that this is a place which will not tolerate hate or anti-Semitism. We will do this in collaboration with other initiatives. We'll work with in an Islamophobia campaign. We will work in a general effort to establish campaigns against racism, but we are very deliberately targeting anti-Semitism because from my own experience of what I have seen, what I have heard, not to do this, not to recognize the rise of a potentially anti-Semitic viewpoint and actions is irresponsible. It must be stamped out, root and stem today. And those actions begin. We began by pronouncing our support for the IHRA. Today, we are announcing that we will begin a very targeted, a community-driven campaign of public awareness against anti-Semitism, and that starts today. So with that said, Mervyn and guests, friends, I really want to say how much I've enjoyed working with the Jewish community, particularly with Rabbi Chernitsky, Steve Wolnitz, Emmanuel Haven, Michael Paul, other leaders from the community here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and how much I've enjoyed B'nai Brith's support. If I can say this, it would be I would encourage B'nai Brith to even have a stronger presence in Newfoundland and Labrador. We cannot do this alone. We may sometimes be, because of our size, because of our relativity, we may not necessarily be on front and center on the conscientiousness scale, but Newfoundland and Labrador is punching above its weight.
Oh yeah,
we are really we're in a place in our history where we wish to share our history and embrace the history that is shared with us. And Newfoundland and Labrador and the Jewish community, our history is now completely intertwined and shared. And we have a responsibility to protect our sisters and brothers. So with that said, I'll leave that at this moment in time. I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Minister Byrne. I am rarely speechless, but I'm almost literally speechless. I'm stunned and gratified, humbled to hear the commitment that Newfoundland and Labrador is making to fight anti-Semitism, other forms of hate. A concrete step that is strong and clear and sends a message. You can count on us to be there to aid you in any way possible. We do have resources and we offer them to you. We will work with you, and we will work with the Jewish community in Newfoundland. You mentioned some of the community leaders. Some of them are here with us this evening. Others are not, but clearly we are going to make sure that everyone is aware of this. The message is actually a wonderful, wonderful message. I think Newfoundland is going to become the dog that wags the Canadian tail, not the other way around, the Canadian dog wagging the Newfoundland tail. This is a concrete example of leadership. I'll get a little bit more into the figures on anti-Semitism when it comes to my turn, but clearly you have our full attention on this call with what you just said. Allow me to say a few things just to clarify. I want to make clear that Charlene Taylor, who's with us tonight, is not actually a member of the House of Assembly. She's the executive officer for the Anglican Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland. Welcome, Charlene, along with the very Reverend Roger Whalen. Paul Dinn is a member of the House of Assembly, represents the Progressive Conservative Party for Topsail Paradise. And I want to say it's important what you said, Minister. It takes everyone to fight against hate. It's not a partisan issue. We have to work together. We can have differences of opinion, but when it comes to something like this, we all need to pull in the same direction. You mentioned the hate that you experience. Often we get calls, particularly from school trustees or municipalities when they want to adopt IHRA, and they get bombarded with thousands of emails. When they check the IP addresses, they find many of them come from outside of Canada, or many of them are the same hateful text. They're not swayed. And, the government of Alberta told us the same thing when they were about to adopt IHRA. They had a campaign of misinformation, disinformation. They rejected it and said IHRA is a very strong and useful tool. And Erwin Kotler and Noah Liu will actually tell us how it is such a tool. I want to say that when every time I'm in Newfoundland, I go to the Rooms. It's a wonderful museum. But everyone on this call should know that the Rooms has an exhibit on the Jews of Newfoundland. There's been a Jewish community in Newfoundland for centuries. It predates Confederation. Jews helped to build the economy in Newfoundland. They helped to build the democratic structures. They've always been a part of the landscape in Newfoundland. They're proud to be Newfoundlanders, just as they're proud to be Canadians at the same time. So, Jerry, I think you've got the attention of the entire Jewish community in Newfoundland this evening. I'll now go to our second speaker, who's actually going to be two speakers. In a 10-minute block, we're going to have Irwin Cotler, the Honorable Irwin Cotler, Canada's former Justice Minister, our current Special Envoy for Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Antisemitism, and also the founder of the internationally renowned Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. And he'll be sharing his time with Noah Liu. Noah has spoken on B'nai Brith calls, and he has a great number of fans for being cogent and articulate. I will give the floor to Irwin Cotler. Irwin? Irwin, you're on mute. You're going to have to start again.
Thank you, Marvin. I'm delighted to join this call. It's one of my last responsibilities as a special envoy, and I'm particularly appreciative of the fact that it's with the government and Newfoundland and Labrador, and specifically with Minister Jerry Byrne, who was one of my closest colleagues, friends. I have the best of memories of our time together. In fact, our time overlapped almost the entire period of both our serving in Parliament, and a true pleasure to have served with him. And I have to say, in listening to your remarks today, Jerry, I've been close to 3 years now as a special envoy. I have to tell you that that was one of the best presentations I've ever heard in both its substance and in its clarity, not only within Canada, but internationally. And what Marvin said, the dog that wags the Canadian tail, no, not only that, that wags the international tail. And I hope to call upon and reference your voice and your remarks in this during the latter part of my mandate, because I think what you exhibited today was exemplary leadership in the combating of anti-Semitism and all forms of hate in a manner, as I said, I've not witnessed such eloquence and such substance and done so succinctly. So you have my highest respect, as we always did when we worked together in Parliament. And to you, Marvin, express my appreciation for the ongoing assistance and resource and initiative you've taken. As I said to you earlier, informally in a call, that you were the reason that the IHRA working definition was adopted by many of the provinces in this country. So I thank you and B'nai Brith for your leadership in this regard. As you mentioned, I will be dividing my time with Noah Liu, who's been my special advisor, and frankly, who has emerged, in my view, as the expert on the IHRA working definition. And the fact that I'm splitting my time with him, he actually could have taken the whole time. The main thing that I wanted to be able to do is to commend Minister Byrne and Governor of Newfoundland for their leadership, their exemplary leadership. And I have to say, as I said, that leadership found compelling expression, Jerry, in your remarks today. Let me begin and discuss the what I would call the origin and nature of the IHRA working definition, but in particular, I'm going to confine my remarks to the Canadian contribution, the Canadian footprint in all of this, which is less well known, but I think deserves to be appreciated and in fact, that leadership can have an international resonance as well. To begin with, and simply put, the IHRA working definition is the most authoritative, comprehensive, and internationally representative definition that we have. One that was, and this is not as well known, one that was democratically adopted over a 15-year period plus by intergovernmental bodies, governments, parliaments, scholars, civil society leaders, and the like. And as I mentioned, in particular, Canada had a distinct footprint. And I will now just summarize the rest of my remarks by just summarizing the evolution of that footprint as quickly as possible. The process began with the Stockholm conferences on the Holocaust in 2000 and 2001, held in Stockholm, Sweden. They were led and organized by Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Laureate Elie Wiesel and the former Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, Per Ahlmark. It developed in particular in the aftermath of the World Conference Against Racism in Durban in September 2001, when a World Conference Against Racism turned into a conference of racism against Israel and the Jewish people. As a member of that Canadian delegation to Durban, as I was a member and headed the Canadian delegation to the Stockholm, I was witness in Durban, in particular, as I've written elsewhere, etc., to a festival of hate, the likes of which I've rarely seen. The drafting process then began through a three-person committee led by Professor Elie Wiesel and Per Ahlmark, which I was happy to join. And in 2005, while I was Minister of Justice, the European Monitoring Group for the Combating of Racism and Xenophobia drafted a definition of anti-Semitism, which contained both traditional and contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism as illustrations, which effectively became the blueprint for what we now have. So the IHRA definition is anchored initially in that European monitoring definition, which Canada, myself then as Minister of Justice, had a role to play. And then in particular, in 2010, in Ottawa, we hosted the Interparliamentary Conference to Combat Anti-Semitism, which adopted the Ottawa Parliamentary Protocol to Combat Anti-Semitism, which was unanimously approved by parliamentary delegates from over 40 countries, and again, initially led by Canada. And the important thing that is, I think, almost not known at all is that the language and the wording of the Ottawa Parliamentary Protocol was the one adopted in 2016 by IHRA without changing a comma. And so you see here the process and the impact that the Canadian footprint had on that process, beginning, as I said, in 2000 and in particular concluding in 2016. And the important point, and with this I close, is that the whole definition, the IHRA working definition, was anchored in a rights-centered approach. It is a rights-centered definition containing, as I mentioned, both traditional and contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism as illustrative examples, but anchored in, and again, not that well known, anchored in the equality rights provisions and anti-discrimination provisions of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and in our international treaty obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to prohibit all forms of incitement to discrimination, hatred, and violence. So there's the Canadian footprint. It's rights-centered. Ahmed Shahid, the former special rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief, who published the landmark report on anti-Semitism for the United Nations in 2018, himself said that this was a compelling definition precisely because of its rights-centered approach. With those words, I'll turn it over now to Noah Lee, and we can all be the beneficiaries of his distinct expertise.
Thank you, Professor. It's as always an honor to speak alongside you, and I should note that my comments today are truly grounded in what I've been able to learn from working alongside Professor Kotler. So I'm going to give a bit more information on the universality of the IHRA definition, what the definition actually looks like. I'll briefly respond to some criticism the definition has faced, and finally, I'll speak about how it should be used. So Professor Kotler has already explained why the IHRA definition is the premier definition of anti-Semitism, and this reality is also evidenced by its widespread global adoption. To date, 42 countries have adopted the definition, and that's since 2016, and includes Canada in 2019. It's received endorsement from the United Nations Secretary General, and as Professor Kotler referred to, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Within Canada, internally, it's been adopted by numerous civil society organizations and educational institutions, several municipalities, and multiple provinces, including, as we've been speaking about tonight, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in May of this year, largely due to the commendable efforts of Minister Byrne. So what actually is the IHRA definition? The definition is comprised of what I describe as a core definition and a number of illustrative examples, which Professor Kotler again alluded to earlier. These examples address both traditional and contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. The core definition is broadly worded so as to encompass the many different manifestations and variations of anti-Semitism, past, present, and future. In contrast, the illustrative examples are much more specific, intended to serve as crucial tools for practically identifying anti-Semitism in real time. The examples of traditional anti-Semitism include stereotypes of Jews as controlling the media, world governments, and the economy, while the more contemporary examples include denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination and holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the State of Israel. Now, Minister Byrne spoke briefly about this. There is some opposition to the IHRA definition, and many of these claims revolve around the fact that it may stifle criticism of the actions of the Israeli government and advocacy for Palestinian human rights. But in reality, it is almost precisely the opposite. The IHRA definition explicitly states that criticism of Israel, similar to that leveled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. So from the perspective of those advocating for Palestinian human rights, this assertion can be seen as ensuring that Jewish and pro-Israel advocates do not zealously overstep and label such criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. While on the other hand, genuine anti-Semitism, such as the examples that I've spoken about, will be so defined and understood. Ultimately, drawing a line as to what is and is not anti-Semitic serves to actually foster and promote peaceful dialogue. The IHRA definition helps set parameters for a healthy, democratic, and tolerant debate, thereby facilitating non-hateful communication and preventing both actual instances of anti-Semitism as well as unjust labeling of anti-Semitism. And in doing so, again, as Professor Kotler spoke about, it aligns with core Canadian values of diversity, multiculturalism, human rights, and equality. Now, in terms of actually using the definition, now that it's been adopted by the province, it's important that it's implemented as well. So I would start by noting that the definition is non-binding and is intended to be primarily used as an interpretive guide for identifying anti-Semitism. The definition can and should be used across and throughout our society by law enforcement, the judiciary, in education and by educational institutions, and in civil society more generally. In 2021, the European Union published a handbook that explains how each of these sectors of society can practically employ the IHRA definition. And the Canadian government has undertaken to publish a similar handbook, which will be tailored to the Canadian context specifically. So to conclude, to combat anti-Semitism, we must begin by defining it. And as Professor Kotler explained, the IHRA definition is the most authoritative, comprehensive, and universal definition of anti-Semitism that exists today. It includes a broad core definition, as well as several illustrative examples, which address both traditional and contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. And finally, again, the definition aligns and indeed was drafted specifically in light of, largely thanks to Professor Kotler, the core Canadian values of diversity, multiculturalism, human rights, and equality. So thank you so much for your time. And I think with that, we'll move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. And it's nice to see you again. And thank you for fleshing out the remarks made by Professor Kotler. In regard to what Erwin said, thank you for the kudos, Erwin. But I would like to say that the IHRA definition is the most clear-cut and authoritative definition. It doesn't take me to get provinces to adopt it. It just takes me to give them the information and allow them to cut through any disinformation, misinformation. In essence, I'll take a little bit of the credit, but not as much credit as you're giving me. And Newfoundland, by the way, has become the 6th province to adopt IHRA, so we still have work to do and information to get out there. I'd also like to mention that Lucy Stoyle, the MHA for Mount Pearl North, has joined this call. I mentioned at the beginning she would be with us. So we're going to go to our next speaker, who is Rabbi Chanan Chernitsky in St. John's. He's with Chabad. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, or just before the call, for those of you who are in the waiting room, no matter where I go, I seem to run into people who know Rabbi Chernitsky. He grew up in Winnipeg. He studied in Montreal, and now he works in St. John's, Newfoundland. He has a lot of followers in Winnipeg and in Montreal, and quite popular as well in St. John's. I want to thank him for having worked physically closely with the government of Newfoundland, and particularly Minister Byrne, to get IHRA adopted and to alert members of the House Assembly to the needs of the Jewish community in Newfoundland. My relationship with politicians in Newfoundland has been either by telephone or by Zoom. It doesn't have the closeness that you get when you actually meet people in person. So I thank Rabbi Chernitsky. You've been present and you've had an impact. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself, his work, and the Jewish community in Newfoundland. Rabbi Chernitsky.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you to all of the speakers. I'd like to acknowledge the support and friendship from Minister Byrne and Minister Abbott, who are real friends of the community, each one supporting the community in a different way. But it's comforting to know that we have real friends in the government. These are people that are serious about what they do, and they take the concerns of the community very, very seriously, which is refreshing and reassuring. I was pretty much introduced by Marvin. I studied in the States, also in Venice, Italy, besides the places Marvin mentioned. So I have fans worldwide. At any rate, we moved to Newfoundland from Montreal in 2017. We came here mainly to serve the Jewish community. For those that you know or don't know, the Jewish community is limited in size, which allows us to also work extensively with the general community. And so besides having classes, children's programs, holiday events, and so on and so forth for the Jewish community, we have a number of projects that are open to the general public. Besides our Hanukkah menorah lighting that's open to the public, most people that come are not Jewish. Of course, also our Holocaust speaker series. Minister Byrne was invited. He helped us with funding. He came and he spoke to open the event. And this is an event, the Holocaust Speaker Series, that attracts hundreds of people who are not Jewish. And that's fantastic, because we want to spread the lesson of the Holocaust of never again as far and wide as we can, of course. And this is something that's been a very, very successful program here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're very happy about that, thank God. So besides that, we have a mental health project for schools called Moment of Silence or Silent Moment, which is about having 1 minute of silent reflection at the beginning of the school day for the children to think about a positive value shared to them by their parent or guardian. And this is not a prayer, bringing prayer or religion into schools. This is, for example, a parent might say to the child, think about being honest, think about your role in society, think that you are unique, think that the world needs you. And the beauty of this is that besides building on the parent-child bond that's often lacking today, is that there's strong anecdotal evidence that from just this 1 minute, there's a significant reduction in youth crime and substance abuse, besides, of course, the tremendous boost in mental health of the students and reduced stress in the schools. Besides that, we started a local branch of what's known as the Friendship Circle or the Friendship Circle NL, where we cater to families with special needs children. And this is non-denominational and secular activities. They have a pen pal project, and the child or youth with a disability could sign up. They could get a letter from one of our volunteers. And right now there's over 60 children from coast to coast in Newfoundland, and also actually there's one child in Labrador who are getting a letter a month from one of our volunteers. We have monthly events. Once a month we have a big event for children with special needs. It could be bowling, it could be a painting party, a drum circle. We try to mix it up. And then last but not least, we have a home visitation program or project where 2 community volunteers visit 1 special needs child for 1 hour a week at the child's home. And that's proven tremendously successful, and we cannot keep up with the demand. There's more parents waiting for volunteers than volunteers available. So we have what we do for the Jewish community. We have what we do for the general community. And again, acknowledging the support and friendship from our provincial government. Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very much appreciate all the work that you do, not only for the Jewish community, but for the general public. Those are some wonderful programs that you announced, and I want everyone to know that they truly are available to anyone who wants to access them. Before I make my presentation, I want to confirm that Inspector Danny Doiron of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary is with us. It's important for us to know that law enforcement is interested in knowing more about anti-Semitism and hate aimed at Jews and other hate crimes, and willing to work with the community to ensure that crimes are solved and perpetrators are prosecuted. I'm not sure, but I believe there's somebody on the call from Mayor Breen's office from the Anti-Racism Committee. I welcome you. We did have an email from the mayor's office indicating someone would be with us, and there's someone who is identified on my screen as Silas's iPhone. I believe that may be Councillor Silas Badcock from Bay Roberts. If it is you, Silas, thank you for being with us this evening. I have been to Bay Roberts once for about 20 minutes on my roundabout trip from Dildo to back to St. John's. We went through a lot of small towns. We had a wonderful time talking to people and really seeing what Newfoundland's all about. Mr. Lucas Fuina, would you put my PowerPoint on screen, please? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make this presentation on behalf of B'nai Brith. For those of you who don't know, we're a national organization. We provide a lot of services, but our main activities aren't actually in direct services. They're more on advocacy and an audit. And I'll explain that in a moment. Let's go to slide number 2. So as you can see, we were founded in Canada in 1875. That's hard to believe, but it's true. We're about to have our 150th anniversary in 2025. And we'll be noting a lot of the people who helped build us into a national organization over the years. We're still on slide number 2. Could we go back there, Lucas? Okay. Lucas, we're having some trouble there. Let's slow it down a bit. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah. Okay, we provide a lot of services directly to the community. That includes food security. We hand out food baskets. We provide seniors housing. B'nai Brith runs affordable housing in Toronto. We promote sports. We run North America's largest softball league in the city of Toronto. We do cultural events, and a lot of it is we provide advocacy and an audit to all levels of government. The advocacy aids law enforcement and governments to better understand issues of hate aimed at Jews and to better decide where to use their limited resources. We also conduct an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. And that gives a clear portrait of where anti-Semitism is happening and what it looks like in the different parts of Canada. And by the way, the audit reveals that anti-Semitism is evolving. It's becoming very different than it was in 1982 when we began auditing. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, there's our cover of our 1982 audit. As I said, of our 2022 audit. As I said, we began in 1982. And unfortunately, I have to tell you this, there's been an increase in anti-Semitism, a major notable increase, particularly over the last decade across Canada. Next slide, please. So these are our results for the year 2022. We recorded 2,769 incidents of anti-Semitism across Canada. It is the fifth consecutive year that we've been over 2,000 incidents. That makes it almost 8 anti-Semitic incidents per day. 85% of our incidents were different forms of harassment. Most of that had to deal with anti-Semitism online, which is one of the reasons why we promote the idea of Canada having to have a robust online harms bill. We do not have it yet, and we've been asking the government of Canada to work towards that. Unfortunately, last year, we had 64.8% increase in incidents in Ontario. Globally, the numbers went down 1.1% between 2021 and 2022. I can't tell you that's good news, because when you compare it one decade over another, in 2012, we only had 1,345 anti-Semitic incidents. In other words, in 10 years, we had 106.9% increase. That's a pretty shocking number. Next slide, please. Here are our numbers in 2022 for the maritime provinces. In Newfoundland, we had 2 cases of vandalism of Jewish institutional buildings, 2 cases of persons being harassed in the street, and 9 cases of online hate, for a total of 13. Prince Edward Island had 0 cases. Nova Scotia had 4. Is it possible to show us New Brunswick? Because I can't see it on my screen.
Yeah, it should be there, Marvin.
Okay.
Maybe you have to move there. There's you might have to move the video screen out of the way.
Okay, you're right. There were 39 cases of anti-Semitism in New Brunswick. New Brunswick comprised the majority of the cases of anti-Semitism in the Maritimes in 2022. However, the story is that the total number of incidents in the Maritimes actually decreased 20% between 2021 and 2022. The number of cases in Newfoundland went down by 50%. There were more than double the number you're seeing on your screen in 2021. And we consider that good news. The reasons, well, it's a little too early to say why and whether that will remain where we are. We're tracking it for 2023, but we're still early in the year, and we don't comment till the year is over. But we believe the heightened understanding of anti-Semitism, as shown by the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, with the support of all members of the House of Assembly, has had a salutary impact that people are more aware of anti-Semitism in the province and willing to call it out. And when the public is willing to call it out, the haters get the message awfully quickly. Next slide, please. There's our global map. Now, you saw that there were 13 instances of anti-Semitism in Newfoundland. There's 722 in Quebec, and there's 1,353 in Ontario. But if Newfoundland was the same population as Ontario, and we extrapolated the number of incidents to match the population, Newfoundland would have come third among the provinces in total incidents last year. Now, there's not an obvious given that it has to be the same way, but if you're looking at it on a per capita basis, that's the results. But we've had good numbers in some of the provinces. Manitoba, for example, had a huge decrease in anti-Semitism in 2022. It went from 223 incidents to 51. And Manitoba spent an awful lot of time talking about IHRA in 2022. The government of Manitoba became the third province to adopt the IHRA definition, and it didn't do it just once, it did it twice. And Jerry, if you're listening, what they did in Manitoba, there was an order in council issued by Premier Stephenson, and there was a motion brought by the opposition to the legislature, which had all party support. There was some very good speeches by Dr. John Gerard from the Manitoba Liberals. They're the third party in Manitoba, and by Wab Kinew, the leader of the opposition for the NDP in Manitoba. Everybody voted for it, and a lot of people watched it online. It really had an impact in Manitoba, and we think it had a role. And Alberta also adopted IHRA, and the numbers went down there as well. So 13 may not sound like a lot, but there's only 530,000 people in Newfoundland. And if you look at it on a per capita basis, it's not all that good either. And there's still work to do. And we're thrilled by your announcement this evening, Minister, and we believe it will have a salutary effect as well. Next slide. So this gives you the breakdown by regions in a way that you can compare 2021 and 2022. As you can see in Atlantic Canada, we went from 80 to, it says 56 incidents. I said 51, a 30% decrease. Quebec had a 12.8% increase. British Columbia and the Yukon had a 41% increase. Alberta, a 19% increase. The Prairies, basically Manitoba, 71% increase. But unfortunately, all of that was washed away by an almost 65% increase in Ontario. The government of Ontario is keenly aware of that. And I'll tell you in a minute some of the things they promised to do in 2023. Next slide. So I wanted to add to what Erwin and Noah had said. The minister had mentioned that he got all sorts of pushback from people trying to belittle IHRA. And IHRA is more than a definition. It's also an international organization, and much of its work deals with preserving Holocaust remembrance. Here are the countries that are members of IHRA. There are 36 of them, I think, 35 of them. Full-time members of IHRA, including Canada. They include most of the democratic world. You notice that the United States and the United Kingdom and France and Germany are members, as is Australia. Countries in Europe, countries in South America are full members of IHRA, and so is Israel. The work IHRA does is facilitated by a different country being the chair of the organization every year. This year, Croatia is the chair of IHRA. Sweden held the chair the year before. Greece was the chair before that. I believe next year, and Erwin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the United Kingdom is going to become the chair of IHRA next year. So IHRA is a very credible international organization with an international membership. We've urged IHRA to be less Eurocentric and to go after the democratic countries everywhere in the world to strengthen the global fight against anti-Semitism. Next slide. IHRA also has observer and liaison countries. We hope these will ultimately become full members. They include countries as diverse as Albania, Brazil, Cyprus, El Salvador, Moldova, Uruguay, Turkey, and New Zealand. And we believe IHRA has the potential to grow. Currently, we're advocating for Ukraine to join IHRA. We would think that's consistent with Ukraine's desire to be part of the democratic world and to be part of organizations such as NATO and the European Union. IHRA is supported by the Council of Europe, the European Parliament, and the European Union, and we would hope that Ukraine would become a member as a country that has a significant Jewish minority even today, but also where part of the Holocaust happened. Nearly 1 million Jews were killed in the Ukraine by the Nazis and their collaborators, and there remain many Holocaust sites in Ukraine that need to be preserved and promoted to the public so that our understanding of the Holocaust can be increased. Next slide. So here are some of the partner organizations. So the next time members of the House of Assembly, if someone tries to run down IHRA and its definition, you can tell them that IHRA is supported by the United Nations, UNESCO, the OSCE, the Arleston Archives, the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, the European Union, the Council of Europe, and the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. I also believe, and Erwin, again, you can help me here, that the Organization of American States supports IHRA formally. Thank you, Erwin. Next slide. So here's the actual definition. We spoke around the definition, but nobody read it. I think it's time it be read. So to adopt the following non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Next slide, please. The IHRA definition also has illustrative examples. There are 11 of them. I'm not going to read them, but I want to alert all the people on this call and those watching us on YouTube that you can go to the IHRA site and look up the examples. And I'll just read one of them to give you an example how clear the definition is. It's anti-Semitic to call for aiding or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. Don't let anyone try to run down the definition. It is, as the academics who worked on it, the experts who worked on it, a very understandable and comprehensible definition of anti-Semitism, and it's a tool that should be spread in each province that's adopted it to their stakeholders. B'nai Brith is calling for educators, police officers, civil servants to get a copy of the IHRA definition, and we will invite Newfoundland and Labrador to formally ensure that it's disseminated so everybody can better recognize anti-Semitism and react to it. Next slide. So 6 provinces have adopted the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. Newfoundland and Labrador, but also Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. And we are engaged in dialogue with the remaining provinces. On the left-hand side of your screen is the anti-Semitism definition proclamation signed by Minister Byrne on May 9th, 2023. Anyone who wants a copy, just email me at marvinr@bnaibrith.ca. We'll send you a copy of that. I don't want the minister to be swamped with requests. We'll take care of that on our end. Next slide. So I said that Ontario was concerned about the numbers that they posted last year. Stephen Lecce is the member of the provincial parliament for King Vaughan. He's also the education minister in Ontario. He's taken part in a number of B'nai Brith calls, and he issued this communique on November the 9th, 2022. Ontario strengthening Holocaust education to counter rising anti-Semitism. The government of Ontario has announced that as of the 2023-2024 academic year, which begins September 5th in the province of Ontario, that there will be mandatory Holocaust education commencing in grade 6. It is the first time that there will be mandatory education on the Holocaust in elementary school. The minister tasked the Ontario College of Teachers to develop an age-appropriate curriculum and to train teachers in how to teach the Holocaust. B'nai Brith has written to all the education ministers in all the provinces, asking them to emulate Ontario's example. We also have learned that Minister Lecce at the recent Council of Education Ministers, which was held July 12th in Saskatoon, alerted his colleagues that Ontario is doing this, and he's written to them, telling them what Ontario's motivation was, which included the fact that their surveys show that 90% of anti-Semitic incidents in Ontario schools happen in middle school from grade 6 to 9. The young children often don't know about the Holocaust or what anti-Semitism is. They spend a lot of time online. They're very susceptible to hate online, particularly misinformation and disinformation. 42% of students told the Education Ministry that they had personally witnessed an anti-Semitic incident at school. And the government of Ontario was able to ascertain that a third of their graduates from high school either doubted that the Holocaust happened, or unsure it happened, or felt it might be exaggerated. And that's a pretty shocking number. And that's why Ontario moved to compulsory Holocaust education, to ensure that every single student will learn about the Holocaust and that nobody will graduate susceptible to disinformation about the Holocaust. The ministry also is looking at preliminary studies from the United States that show that states that have done the same thing in the US in past years are beginning to witness a decrease in the number of anti-Semitic incidents, and as well are also witnessing, as a corollary, fewer incidents of hate aimed at the Asian and Black communities. So that's a good thing. We're following those studies as well. And we're also going to redouble our efforts to get the other provinces to look at doing this for 2024, 2025. I want to commend the Northwest Territories, which told us that they would use the Ontario curriculum if they can. They'll be contacting Ontario to introduce this, but some provinces are quite advanced in their discussion with us. Minister Byrne, please let your colleague in education know that we'll be knocking on his door pretty soon to give him the information from Ontario. Next slide. This is part of the documentation that Ontario circulated. It tells us the grade 6 social studies curriculum has been updated to include learning about the Holocaust to help younger students gain a deeper understanding of the significance and combat rising cases of anti-Semitism in schools. And students will develop, according to the curriculum, a deeper understanding of the significance of the Holocaust. It begins in grade 6. They'll learn about the experiences of Jewish individuals, families, and communities within Canada, and the ongoing impact of anti-Semitism. They'll learn about the responses of the Canadian government to the Holocaust and the development of Canada's responses to the acts of hate and human rights violations after World War II. It's a lot longer than that, but we just wanted to show you the first slide in their curriculum. And those who would like a copy of this simply need to email me and we will provide it to you, as we are already providing it to all the provincial ministries of education right across Canada. Next slide. Well, we have a little surprise for you. That handsome young man on the right side of your screen is Irwin Cotler. I want to let everyone know that Irwin has been awarded the Lantos Foundation Human Rights Prize for his work in human rights advocacy. And for those who don't know, even before he's awarded that, he's going to be awarded the Presidential Medal by the government of Israel for his work to promote human rights around the world and for his work for the Jewish people globally. Erwin, you're an inspiration to all of us. I call you a friend, but you're also, as Noah says, a mentor and a shining example of what we should all do. I remember the words of Raoul Wallenberg: when faced by unspeakable evil, none of us can be silent. And you epitomize that leadership. I want to let you know that the Borough of Cotoneige NDG has finally finished completing Raoul Wallenberg Park. The signs just went up. It's in my former district now, represented by Sonny Morose, the new city councillor in the Snowdon area of Montreal. And I'm hoping that we will have a ceremony by the city of Montreal to formally mark the occasion of Raoul Wallenberg Park in Montreal. Congratulations on Lantos Foundation Prize, and congratulations on winning Presidential Medal to be given by President Herzog to you in person, Erwin. Next slide. And this is how to reach us. I'm just going to leave this up for a moment so you can see the email addresses for us. There's myself, Will Barkley, Research and Data Analyst in the League for Human Rights, and Lucas Fuenas, a researcher and writer, and one of our two technical hosts tonight. I want to thank Luca Fuena and Bernie Hellreich, who is handling the YouTube portion of the evening. All our calls go very smoothly. I'm personally technically not too savvy, but these two guys make me look very, very good. So thank you, Bernie, and thank you, Lucas. And that, I believe, is the end of this PowerPoint. Am I correct? Thank you very much. And those who want further information, just email us and we'll send you the documents from this evening. We are concluding the speaking portion of the evening, and we're actually beyond the stated time for the call. There's a number of our guests this evening who will need to leave, so I'm going to conclude the call by thanking everyone who was here this evening, particularly the elected officials and law enforcement from Newfoundland and Labrador, members of church groups and community organizations across Newfoundland and Labrador. We will stay in touch, and we hope to see more progress. I meant what I said. Newfoundland is quickly demonstrating it's the dog that wags the Canadian tail. We're going to reach out to our colleagues right across Canada and say, if Newfoundland and Labrador is able to do this, you can do far more as well. The number of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada is unacceptable. And when Statistics Canada says that year in and year out, Jews are the most targeted religious minority, comprising almost 67% in 2022 of all such police-reported hate crimes, we need to talk about this on a regular basis. We need to educate and armor our young people, and we need to use the tools that we have in the law. We also need to better alert all the stakeholders as to IHRA as a tool. I'll conclude by saying we had a case several months ago in which a swastika was put on a Jewish institutional building in a small town. The local police department did not investigate it as a hate crime because they didn't recognize the swastika as a hate symbol. We worked with them. We advised them of the IHRA definition. We showed them case law. Eventually, it was properly investigated, but it just shows that a lot of work needs to be done. I'm heartened by the number of provinces that have moved forward with IHRA. I'm heartened by Ontario's leadership on Holocaust education, and I'm heartened that ministers like Jerry Byrne are strong and clear voices in his province and are promoting more work to combat hate. As Erwin Kotler once said, it's not, and as Justin Trudeau once said, it's not just for the Jewish community to combat anti-Semitism, it is for all of us. And for other forms of hate, it is not just for the Muslim community to fight Islamophobia. It is not just for the Asian community to fight anti-Asian racism. It is not just for the Black community to fight anti-Black racism. It's for all of us to speak up. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for being here on this call this evening, and the call is now concluded. Have a very good evening.